Hello, P3 family, and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Dr. Judy. And in this episode, I'm going to be interviewing a very special guest, Dr. Novia Reid. Dr. Novia Reid is a licensed clinical social worker, a certified clinical trauma professional, transformational speaker, and writer. She holds a PhD in marriage and family therapy. And Dr. Novia's current focus is helping women who have encountered trauma, heartbreak, or setbacks regain their identities. She is committed to helping women rediscover their authentic selves through her books and her coaching program, Regain Your Core. In this episode, we will be discussing mental health, identity, and self-worth, specifically geared for women of faith and men of faith as well. And so I'm so excited to jump into this episode because mental health is very important. As we've seen since the pandemic, there has been, I would say, even maybe like a crisis of mental health. People are feeling stressed, anxious, as well as people in general are struggling with identity. And that's something that's really important, especially in the body of Christ. It's important for us to know our identity and to know who we are, because when we don't know who we are, other people can tell us who we are. And so welcome to the podcast YouTube, Dr. Novia.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Hello, P3 family.
All right. So to start, I wanted to get an idea of, tell us your story as far as what made you decide to become a therapist.
Okay, so when I was younger, well, therapy is not giving advice, but when I was younger, I would just talk to my friends, whether it was about relationships or just whatever they were going through, and I just enjoyed it. And I think eventually, just from me going through certain situations, God just really revealed to me that, hey, I want you to be a therapist. I want you to help people. So it was just really a series of life events that really, to me, just confirmed that, okay, that I actually want you to do therapy, or specifically couples therapy. So there wasn't really one specific thing, but just a series of things that I feel that God just used to kind of point me in that direction, basically.
Oh, that's awesome. So it kind of was like naturally in you, like you were born to do this.
Yes, with some refinement, because you think, oh, I love giving advice. And then when you go into therapy,
Yeah.
you realize, oh, that's really not what it is. But, I still loved it. And I think the best thing is just when you actually see, people come in a certain way and they get better and, just things are different for them. So I think I love that part, of that work. And so, yeah. That's
Oh,
what I
that's
would
so
say.
awesome. That's so needed. So tell us about the work that you do now, your program. Who do you serve?
So it's funny because the birth of Regain Your Core actually came from a counseling session. It's weird, but I was actually in a counseling session, a therapy session with a young lady, and we were talking about how she, just felt like she had lost her sense of self. She wasn't showing up the same in work and just everything like that. And just in the conversation, in the session, the words regain your core, came to mind. We were talking about regaining the core of who she was, her personality, etc. And then later on, God just said, I want you to create a coaching program for that. And so for me, at the time, those three words were just related to the session, nothing, to do with anything else. But then God put it in my spirit to actually create a coaching program. So I did. And so Regain Your Core really serves, women who want to regain their identity. So they've lost themselves from maybe a trauma, a setback, or, a heartbreak. And so the program is just really designed to help them reconnect with themselves, to help them restore their values and their boundaries, and to practice holistic self-care. So it's really catered to women, though, who are also solution focused, women who understand that, okay, this is an area that I need addressed. So it's women who have self-awareness, women who are really committed to really doing the work to help them regain who they are at their core, basically.
Oh, that's awesome. So is it for women of a certain age group or is it a pretty broad age range?
It's a broad age range. It's more so focused on, okay, have you lost your identity? Do you understand the consequences of that? Do you have self-awareness regarding that? And are you more willing to look for solutions than focusing on the problems? Because that's really my coaching approach. our time together is not heavily spent on focusing on the problem or focusing on the why or focusing on how you got there. The focus really is on you're here now and what do we need to do to get you to where you desire to be. And that's different in a sense of a lot of times, even from a therapy standpoint, we may spend a lot of time talking about the problem and looking at the root causes and focusing on why it happened. And that can really be counterproductive. And so, it may not be for every, women, but for those who really want to focus on solutions and moving forward and who have self-awareness, then that could be a really good fit for them.
Oh, okay. See, that sounds so needed and so beneficial for sure. Because women, sometimes we can lose ourselves in relationships
Oh, yeah.
and we attach our identity and our self-worth to experiences that we make with, particularly if they're negative experiences.
No, absolutely. I have my own similar experience of that with a relationship. A lot of times, that's really the source of it. Women lose themselves in relationships, whether it's because they have a desire to be loved or be in a relationship or get married or have a title. A lot of women lose themselves completely and they really just immerse themselves into someone else's identity or who someone else expects them to be or who the man expects them to be. And so, yeah, it happens a lot more often than we may even realize or want to admit. But a lot of women have walked that path and are still walking that path today. So, yeah.
Wow. So you talked about your program that helps women to regain their identity. So what is identity? What does that mean? And is that something that changes over time from, you're a child, you're a teenager to an adult?
For me, I define identity as really the core of who you are. So really what forms your identity is your personality, your character, and your heart. And so as you grow, as you evolve, as you have certain experiences, your identity can change. I think my identity, has evolved over time because of my experiences, because your character really, in essence, is based on your values and your core beliefs. And so over time, if you're growing or if you've changed, you've become a new person, then your values can naturally change. And so that can be such a beautiful thing because maybe you believed in certain things when you were younger and you've grown older and you've adopted a new sense of values that no longer align with what you were taught. So there are different definitions of identity. But for me, when I was, building the program, God just really spoke to me and that just really aligned with me because at the essence of who we are, our heart, we feel that's where our emotions, our instincts, everything flows from. Our capacity to love and be loved flows from there. And so really our personality, that's just really how we show up in the world, our traits, our behaviors, how we interact with other people. And so those are the three core things that for me defines someone's identity. And it has the capacity to evolve over time.
Oh, okay. So would you say, so everyone has an identity, right? Everyone has
Oh,
some
everyone.
identity, right? Yeah.
Everyone.
Okay. But it can
Yes.
change over time.
It,
It
it
seems like
definitely can.
it seems like it would be really important to be self-aware actually of your thoughts and your feelings and what you think about yourself. I'm just thinking, and I bet a lot of people who don't really take much time to just self-reflect and pay attention to their body might not even know what they think their identity is. They may be getting the definition of their identity from what other people are telling them.
No, that's definitely true. I think self-awareness is such a beautiful thing. It's a powerful thing, but a lot of people are scared of it, I believe. And that's because for you to become self-aware, that requires you to have a certain degree of conversation and introspection. And some people are really just afraid of what they might find, but they're also maybe afraid of what they have to face because, okay, you're self-aware. Now what? What do I do with this awareness? And a lot of people are afraid and some of them don't know what to do. And I think that also comes from just not being necessarily comfortable or confident in being with ourselves, because we're not necessarily confident and comfortable with our own thoughts, especially if we have a lot of intrusive thoughts, especially if
Right.
we spend a lot of time ruminating and have negative self-talk. We may love the idea of self-awareness and what it brings, but we're maybe like afraid to practice it because we're not sure how to really effectively navigate it. But it really is a beautiful thing. And when we cultivate self-awareness, it is so powerful because we actually get to be in touch with who we are. And it goes back to identity, because when you really get in touch with who you are, then you understand what your values are. You understand what your boundaries are. You understand what's non-negotiable and what's negotiable. And a lot of people can end up breaching their boundaries because they really aren't clear on what they are. And one of the things that I say is you can't really honor what you're unclear about. And so self-awareness is really so powerful. So, yeah.
That's so good. You cannot really honor what you are not aware of.
Nope, you can't.
And it's probably better to really have a solid idea of who you are, what you're about, where you're going before you get into a long-term relationship. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking like out
Yeah.
loud, kind of like, in high school, there's pressure to
Uh-huh.
date, even as
Mm-hmm.
young as like 12 and 13. And then by the time you get 20, 25, you've dated multiple people. And then
Mm-hmm.
now I feel like, what is it? 50% of marriages end in divorce. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people are on their second marriage. So how
Yeah.
does a woman who's, let's say she's been through several different traumatic relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe she thinks that she's not lovable, or maybe she thinks that she's a bad person or something like that. How does she kind of recover from that and regain and rediscover her identity and who she is?
That's a really good question. I think it can be the same regardless of whatever any woman has gone through, whether it's a trauma, whether it's a heartbreak, or whether it's a setback. And I think it really starts with deciding what really aligns with who you are. So it really comes to a point of, what are my essential values? Like, what are the things that are really important to me, and who's the woman that I want to show up as in relationships, in spaces? Because you first have to have an idea of who you want to be. You may not be there yet. You may have to do some work to get there, but who
Hmm.
is this woman that you want to actually show up as? And I think that's such a beautiful opportunity for women to dive deep into that.
Yeah.
What kind of conversations do I want to have? What are my interests? And this is where self-dating is so powerful. Like, I just did a video
That
on
word, I'm
how,
just
yeah, self-dating can transform like your life. And it's such a beautiful thing because through that, you get to discover yourself. You get to discover what's important to you. But also, I think even those relationships that have been traumatic and painful, that's an
mhm.
opportunity for the woman to look at it and say, what did I learn about myself from those relationships? What did I learn that was important to me, that I know for my next relationship that I must have and that I can't involve in my next relationship? Who do I want to be in my relationship? So even though the pain is there, you don't want to ignore or negate it, but I see it as a beautiful opportunity for women to learn so much about themselves. And instead of using those prior toxic relationships as and focusing on the bad in them, again, not ignoring the pain or ignoring, the bad that may have happened, but using it as a golden opportunity to say, what did I learn from that? What can I take away from those experiences? I may have lost myself, but what did I learn about myself? What do I see as myself moving forward that I don't want to tolerate, that I need to be able to nurture my femininity and to be whole with myself? And so it's a beautiful opportunity. And I think if it's a chance for women to think about lessons, but also really to identify the type of women they want to become. And then once you have an idea of who it is that you actually want to become, the personality you are, the values you want to uphold, the boundaries that are really important to you, then you can do the work to actually taking steps to becoming that woman. And that's how
I
I
love
think you can
that.
start the journey of recovery.
Okay. See, this is why people need a therapist, because you're saying things that it's like regular people don't every day wake up and be like, let me see, what can I learn from that experience? How can I grow? Most people spend a lot of time in the
Yeah.
venting stage. And
Yes.
that's why I
Yeah.
think it's so important to have a therapist. I've been seeing one for a couple of years now, and I've never been seeing a therapist before. I didn't think it was
Mhm.
necessary, to be quite
Mhm.
honest. And now I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so helpful, because you have your
Yeah.
friends, your family, and you
Mhm.
talk to them about stuff, but they don't really help you to get past the frustration to the growth phase, to the learning phase, right? And sometimes people don't even want to go there. Like I tend to be the person that's looking to grow all the time and looking to learn. So I tend to look at problems from that light. I don't stay in the period of complaining, venting, feeling like, oh, woe is me. I don't stay there very long. I quickly shift to growth. Like, what am I learning from this? Why did God allow me to go through this? What am I going to learn from this? But I find that most people don't really think like that. And so that's why I think having a therapist is like so helpful. I tell people now, I think everybody should have a therapist. You need a primary doctor, a dentist, and a therapist.
No,
Three.
and the thing about friends and family, they're phenomenal, but I think sometimes we may stretch them beyond their capacity.
Yes, 100%.
Not intentionally, and they may not mind, but we have to really look at our friends and family's capacity. Do they have the capacity for everything we bring to them? Yes, they can give us advice. Yes, they can give us perspectives, but do they have the capacity to really bring us through every season and every situation? And so sometimes that's where really outside perspective, such as a therapist, can really be valuable, because your friend is not being your therapist, they're being your friend. And so sometimes we can lean in sometimes a little bit too much and sometimes too hard, really expecting from them what we should be really seeking from someone else. And so that can put a strain on friendships and family members too, because their capacity is not necessarily the same, and we can stretch them, just way beyond what they're able to actually give us and provide for us. So.
I'm so glad you said that, because I'm sure the viewers can relate to when a friend is dealing with an issue that you don't have the capacity to help them to navigate through it. And every time you talk to them, they are stuck and they're not able to move forward. And it drags you down. Like emotionally, it brings you down. And so since I've been going to my therapist, I'm mindful of not relying on my friends excessively to be an emotional crutch for me, and instead to take that to my therapist. And then also I take a lot of things to God. I don't go to my friends and tell them all my problems. I tell it to God first. And then by the time I've talked to him for it a long time, I might not even feel the need to talk about it to a friend. So those are the two things that I want to encourage the audience to think about, and maybe even make a shift in when you're venting and sharing and telling your friends and family or whoever, your husband, even. God should be your best friend. Tell God all of these things, because some of the things you're sharing with someone else, you probably are not even supposed to repeat it, because sometimes we're repeating things about other people that could impact how other people view that person. Do you know what I mean? Like you go to church and you get in a situation. So you tell your friend about, girl, do you know what so-and-so did at church? And then that friend that you're telling that story now has a negative perception of that person at church. So we have to be mindful of who we're sharing things with. And there are resources that you can tap into. There's God. I believe Christians need to pray more, and then there's therapists. And I believe that Christians need to be more open to working with therapy. So I'm so glad that you said that. And I hope that the viewers kind of really receive that sometimes we're unloading things on, this is me speaking. Sometimes we're unloading things on our friends that we shouldn't be unloading on friends, that we should be taking to God and a therapist. That's what I think.
No, yeah, because what I love about God, just having a conversation with God, honestly, could solve a lot of things. But I think also when you go to God, God can sometimes direct you to the right person. Who can I share this with? Because not every friend has the capacity to share certain things. There are certain friends you might go to them for relationship advice. You may go to another friend for parenting advice. And so God can directly show you who to actually go to for a specific type of advice. And then just to kind of touch on what you said earlier, I remember I was having a conversation with God the other day, and one of the things he said to me, he just said to me that that's not your story to tell. And some of what we share with others may be well intended, but if it's about someone else and they haven't given permission, and it can, like you said, distort someone else's view of them, it's not our story to tell. And God has really shifted that. And I think that's so important in relationships too. When we're forming romantic relationships or even friendships, there's certain things that people tell us in confidence that really aren't our stories to tell. And that can really help preserve the strength and the trust and the sacredness of relationships. But So I just wanted to touch on that because I thought it was so good when you said it. So
Oh, yeah, that's so good. And what you just said reminded me of that probably breaks down marriages and friendships too, because
yeah,
if someone shares something with their mother about their spouse, and then it gets back to the spouse, the mother's like, oh, Novia said that you did this. And then the husband's like, wait, did I talk about this with you? It feels like they're talking about you behind your back,
yeah,
right? It's not a good feeling. I've been
yeah,
there too with
no,
like friends. And I was like, oh, so they talked about the situation in my absence. And this one particular case, ever since that happened, my trust in them was kind of eroded. And for me, trust is a big deal. And once I detect that trust has been broken, it's kind of hard for me to go back there because for me, that's like a moral issue.
Yeah, and the thing with that is, I think sometimes those are worth conversations because, it's one of the things that I talk about. This is not a plug to the program, but it's one of the things I talk about when we're talking about boundaries is when people break our boundaries, one of the things we have to realize is that we all come from different cultures, we all come from different backgrounds, and we've also had different experiences in relationships. So what you may think somebody should naturally know to uphold, they may have no idea. And so sometimes we have to get to a more willing place of having open conversations about, hey, you broke this boundary of mine and it made me feel this way. But a lot of times I think what we do is we don't say anything because we have this assumption that the person should have known better. When in reality, there are a lot of times where the person didn't even know they offended us. They didn't even know they broke a
That's
boundary,
true.
or it was that severe. And we hold this bitterness in our heart, and resentment has built up, and the relationship has shifted when in reality, the relationship could be genuinely restored, either from really the person saying, yes, I messed up, or I really didn't know. And so sometimes really just having a conversation, having a simple conversation can heal a lot. In friendships and
Hmm.
relationships, having just a simple conversation can heal a lot. So I
That's
just
so
wanted
true,
to,
but that's also very difficult. And I'm more
yeah,
of a direct person. So
yeah,
traditionally, I would have the conversation with the person, but it's always so awkward for me because the person either is not honest and doesn't tell me
gotcha.
anything. They say,
Understood.
oh, it's fine, don't worry about it. So I've stopped actually going to people and having conversations. I let them approach me. Like I've literally had one person who was clear she was upset. Like we and then they just like give you the cold shoulder, but they don't discuss it. And most times it's actually misunderstanding. Most of the time.
Yeah,
And this happens all the time in
yeah.
marriages too, I'm sure. I'm sure that people,
Yes,
like you
yes.
say, don't communicate. And it's the thing.
Hmm.
People think they communicate better than they really do. Sometimes I think even
Yeah,
women sometimes think they communicate really well, but everyone communicates differently. Right. So
differently.
you may think you're sending a message to someone else, but it may be received differently. So I love how you say about like having a conversation because even in retirement age, like no matter what age you're in, like, we're kind of like a younger, but I'm just thinking like my mom, my aunts and whatnot, they're navigating friendships too, as friendships
Yeah,
change from different seasons.
yeah.
And sometimes, a friend will kind of like cool off and then you don't know what happened. But in cases like that, do you think one person should say something? Like when it's just like naturally the friendship just grows apart. Like nothing
I,
happened. You know what I mean?
it's,
Is it just the
I,
season is over?
it's a season is over, but for me, I had a situation that happened, recently, and I'm talking about 16 years, and it just the friendship just dissolved. But because the friendship was valuable to me, I made a due effort to find out, hey, what are we okay? I noticed this is happening, this is not like us,
Girl.
because the
So you were
friendship,
friends with them for 16 years?
about 16 years, and yeah, and it
Why is
just
this very
dissolved.
similar to a situation that I'm in? I feel
Yeah,
like you're calling
yeah.
me out.
Sorry. No, but because, and one thing to consider is, I feel is important to consider in this situation is how important is preserving the relationship to me? How
Hmm.
important is the relationship to my growth, to my health, to my development? And really, that really can be a strong determinant factor of how you actually approach it. Because we had been friends for so long, because I valued the person and the friendship, I made the genuine effort to reach out and say, hey, and the response I got was, we're good. And so because I knew that wasn't the case, I just left it as is because I knew I did my part. So I really think you don't have to have that approach to every relationship. Some things really just are allowed to just flow because we do evolve, and some things naturally do just fall off, and that's okay. I think it's just important for, people to decide for themselves what's really important and how important is preserving, this relationship to me. And then it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about having a conversation, and you had a conversation with someone and they just didn't respond. Sometimes the conversation tells you exactly what you need to know. That, like, just as how that conversation told me that this is it, the outcome of that conversation did that for me. And sometimes the conversations that we are afraid or uncomfortable with having, those are the ones that we probably need to have, because they will tell us exactly what we need to know, whether or not this relationship or friendship is worth preserving or not. Their response, their attitude, their actions can be so telling, right? To actually give us the answer that we've been praying to God for. God, what should I do? God, is this relationship worth preserving? And sometimes God is saying the answer is in the thing that you're unwilling to do, which can sometimes be having a conversation or asking a certain question or posing something to the person. Sometimes we find the very answers we're looking for that way.
That's so true. So having that hard conversation can be beneficial.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
So what about in
extremely.
marriages? What about in marriages of the couple who, I've heard people say you shouldn't go to bed angry, right? But then some people, they sleep in different bedrooms because they're like, you know what, we just need to cool down and we'll come back tomorrow and have this conversation. So does it depend on the couple? Are there any basic rules that couples should follow as far as communication and conflict, I guess resolving conflict?
The biblical perspective is don't go to bed, angry. So I think when you come from that biblical approach, you may have a different sense towards following that. But is it an approach that can be applied to any couple? Yes, because when you go to bed angry, a couple of things. Number one, you don't know what your next breath will be like. You don't know
That's so
what
true.
the next minute will be like. And so how do you want to leave this?
Right.
It's a matter of, how do I want to leave this? You may not be able to resolve everything in that moment, but you still get a chance to leave it you get to decide how you end that conversation, whether or not the content of the conversation is fully resolved, but you get to decide how it ends that night in that moment. Do we end it in peace? Do we end it in calling each other names? Or do we end it and say, okay, we can agree to disagree? So I think just some basic parameters for communication is, we're not going to call each other names. We're not going to blame. We can still express ourselves. And one of the basic rules of communication is just really expressing what you would like to see happen, what you desire, versus complaining about what not is. Because the thing is, like, when we complain, that can cause, first of all, that can cause someone to become defensive. It can seem as though you're attacking them. They can feel like their character versus the issue is being attacked, because when you're saying you don't take out the garbage, you don't do anything, that can be interpreted as I'm lazy and I'm not hardworking, which is really a sense of someone's character. And so sometimes we don't think about that. We just think, we're just talking and I'm just saying he didn't take out the garbage, but we have to understand how people may interpret that. And so that can cause someone's defenses to rise. And instead of really having a simple conversation, they feel like, okay, I'm in World War II, I have to defend myself. And so instead of it being a conversation that can lead toward a resolution, we're figuring out ways to really off the attacks that we feel are happening within us. So I think just some basic parameters are, okay, we're not going to call each other names. Tell me what it is that you need. Tell me what it is that you would like to see happen, versus complaining about some things. And the Bible talks about, do everything without grumbling and complaining. So I think it's more proactive and better and more helpful to talk about what you'd like to see happen, what you'd like to see changed, versus complaining about what's not happening. And just using I statements is something that, I would like for you to do this, or I would love, I love it when you do this. I love it when you take out the garbage, on Fridays, and just being able just to express what it is that you want to see happen. And just being able to express why it's important to you. Because the other thing with human relationships is that what may be important to one person may be minuscule to the other. It may not have the same significance. And I think it's sometimes important for us to go the extra step and say why. Some people may say, well, I shouldn't have to explain this to this person. They should already know. But the reality of it is, that's where humility comes in. And that's where understanding, especially in romantic relationships, men are wired differently than women. Men are problem solvers. They want a quick fix. So this is something I learned from my research study. One of the wives said she would share with the husband. It's called a sharing moment. And it's something she used. I'm not the owner of the technique. It's something she shared from a boot camp where she would just tell her husband, I'm just going to share with you. You don't speak during that time. I'm just sharing. I don't need a solution. I don't need an answer. And that's understanding men's nature, because men's nature is to fix things,
So
problem
she's
solve.
telling him
So
that she
she's
doesn't
telling
need a
him, hey,
solution.
I don't need a solution. I just need you to listen. And if she needs a response, then she can tell him, but not a solution. And it really goes back to us really trying to understand the nature of each other. We're wired differently. God wired men and women differently. And so when we have a better understanding and even respect for those differences, then we can really strive to communicate better and have just healthier relationships.
That's so
I know
good.
that was a
And
lot.
that was very, very good. I know somebody
I'm
listening is
passionate
thinking
about
about the
relationships with you.
trash. Like literally her husband this morning probably didn't take out the trash. So I want to just like bring it home for her.
Yeah.
So you're saying, because this seems unnatural, but this is what the Christian walk is like, doing things that is probably against our nature, but God can help us. That's what the Holy
Yes,
Spirit is for.
yes,
So
yes.
basically you're saying that if your husband is not taking out the trash and he's doing it every day, every week, for months, and you're irritated. You're like, oh my God, why is it not taking out the trash? Instead of saying, why don't you take out the trash? You can say something like, I really love it when you take out the trash. It really makes me feel, I don't know, taken care of or whatever. So say something like
Yeah.
that. Now,
Or it
okay,
takes a load off of me,
it
or it
takes a
makes
load
things
off of
easier for
me.
me. Whatever. There's so many ways to navigate it, but it really just boils down to
Hmm.
removing it just from the couple relationship or just making it to
Yeah,
relationships
yeah.
on a whole. Just think of how it is when somebody approaches you and they come to complain to you about something that you're not doing or they
Mm.
want you to do. Think about how differently you would receive it if they express to you what they would like to see and what they desire from you versus what they think you're not doing and what expectations that you're not meeting. Think about how you want to be spoken to. Think about the approach and how much different it would be if somebody approached you in that way. And because this is really all encompassing, not just of romantic relationships, but parent child relationships too. A lot of the ways we communicate can come off as criticism and demeaning, and we have to think about how that affects our children and even our friendships, and it's just really, it's an approach that we can just apply to all the different areas of our relationships.
I love that. I can even see how that would be beneficial at work too. And as you're saying,
Hmm.
like, think about how you feel when someone comes with what you're not doing. You automatically feel defensive, and it makes
Hmm.
you less receptive to whatever feedback they're telling you that they want you to do. And yeah, that's very powerful. I think that could be a, what do you call it? Like an action item. I always like to have like points where I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
this is something to make note of. The next time before you're thinking to criticize or complain to someone, whether it's someone that's under you at work, a coworker, your child, or your spouse, think about how you would feel if that was
Yeah.
said to you, and maybe see if you could reframe it so that it
Hmm.
sounds more positive. And then I was just thinking of a scripture that says, a kind word turns away wrath.
Turns
And there are
away
a lot of
wrath.
scriptures about that. So the way we package things, just doing unto others as we would have them do unto us, like it doesn't feel good. So let's try and be kind to others with our words and even with our criticism. I think there's a time for criticism, like as a employee, there's times when you have your annual review or your quarterly review or whatnot. But if you are a boss and you're someone that has people under you, it's not necessary that every time someone makes a mistake, you're pulling them in the office and criticizing them.
Yeah. And and I love what you said about like a soft answer turns away wrath, because this is something we should consider. One of the truth is still the truth even if you speak it in kindness. So it's not about just,
Hmm.
oh, you're just being positive. The truth spoken kindly is still the
Okay,
truth.
gotcha.
You're not any less powerful, or you're not any less strong because you take a gentle approach. And I'm saying that because I think sometimes we can equate positivity or even gentleness or certain things with weakness, and it's not, and so by us taking the time to reframe things and say gentler or kinder, we can actually shift so much in our relationships, but also just in our physical and mental well-being. But it's still the truth, so it's no less valuable or powerful just because you say it in a kind and humble manner.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So still speaking the truth, but in a kind manner, and
Yeah,
then maybe
kind,
rephrasing it so it
respect.
doesn't sound like an
Yeah.
attack.
Yeah, and it's still the truth. You're still saying, well, because I think people may say, well, we're just sugarcoating. No, it's not sugarcoating. You're still speaking the truth. You're just speaking the truth in a more productive and beneficial way, but you're still conveying the truth and what it is that you need and desire and hope for.
Gotcha. That's so good. And when we don't share how we feel, or when we start to get that resentment building up, that builds up over
Yeah.
time, and that
Hmm.
erodes relationships as well. So I like what you shared about having,
Correct.
open, honest communication. But I wanted to shift to talk about resiliency. And I feel like since the pandemic, there's been a lot of challenges that people are dealing with: financial, mental health, and then society just seems to be falling apart, in my opinion. How how does a person of faith maintain their inner peace, foster resiliency in these stressful times? Someone who's busy, dealing with maybe failing health, maybe a failing marriage, maybe having a child that's giving them difficulties. What are some tools and tips that people of faith can use to stay strong mentally during difficult times?
Oh, there are a lot of things, but I think definitely one of the things that's hardest to do but so beautiful is just worship. I've learned that worship is an antidote to a lot of things, if and I think, but it's so challenging because you don't want to worship. Sometimes during difficult things, you want to complain and you want space, and there's room for everything. God has room for everything. God has room for venting. He makes room for talking, but he also makes room and he desires worship. And I think worship is just such a powerful thing to engage in when we're going through difficult times. But outside of worship, I think it's just really having that quality time with God. It's really pouring out and cultivating intimacy with God. I have found that really in my moments of deep overwhelm, when I've gone to God, there's just been it's really inexplicable for me anyway, but I have literally found myself restored. And I think it is so powerful when Jesus says, "Come to me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He literally means it, but we have to come to him, and we have to come to him in our current state. I think a challenge is that we come to Christ or we come to God when we are at the end of our rope, which is okay. But I think if we're seeking day-to-day strength, then we have to come to him before or in the middle of it to really get restored and to get replenished. And it goes back to the point of sometimes in the midst of that replenishment, God may say you need a therapist. Sometimes in the midst of that replenishment, God may say you need to go take a trip to 𝗡𝗏𝗏𝗏 or take a spa or get a massage, whatever that looks like for you to replenish. I think it's important, but it's really about taking some time for yourself and asking yourself, at least for me, what do I need in this moment? I'm feeling overwhelmed. What do I need in this moment to help get me through? And sometimes that could just be mental rest. Sometimes it could be physical rest. But it's important for us to really be in tune with ourselves and to recognize those feelings of overwhelm, to understand like what's happening in our bodies, what's happening. I know my triggers of overwhelm. I can tell you very clearly when I'm getting overwhelmed. And part of that goes back to what we talked about earlier, self-awareness and knowing what to do with that. So when I am finding myself being overwhelmed, what do I need in this moment? And just meeting our needs in that moment. So yes, faith is definitely there. Worship is definitely there. Going to God is definitely there. And from asking him what we need, but it's also really spending time with ourselves. And when we sense that overwhelm, really asking ourselves what's needed and being able to meeting those needs for our overwhelm.
Oh, that's so good. I love how you bring up about worship, because you're right. That doesn't feel like that's what you want to do in that moment.
Yeah.
You feel like you want to sometimes not even talk to God for a minute, or you want to be like,
Mhm.
what are you doing? What's happening?
Yeah.
So you forgot about me?
Uh,
Yeah. So
yeah.
that's very good.
But it helps. Like it has helped
Well,
me so much. And I feel like sometimes it's my friend reminded me of this. She says sometimes the very thing that we don't want to do is the very thing that we need to do in
mm-hmm.
that moment. And I think that's sometimes what it is with worship. It may not be the thing we feel like doing, it may not be the thing we want to do, but yet still oftentimes it's the thing that's needed and that will actually replenish us.
Yeah, it does kind of rejuvenate and lift you up. And you're right. I want to say sometimes I think too, we depend on people to provide the type
Mm-hmm.
of emotional support and unconditional love and loyalty that can only be provided
Mm-hmm.
from God. And since I've kind of, in the past year, I would say my spiritual walk with God has gotten very, very close, very, very intimate. And
Awesome.
I've learned that when you depend on Him fully and make Him the CEO of your life,
Mm-hmm.
He envelopes you with His peace and His love. Like, it's something that I can't even describe. Because last year when I
Mm-hmm.
was dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome and I was out of work, it was a 4 month period where I was on medical leave, and I was at one point in the early, maybe half of it, angry, pissed off at God, like every single day, like crying out, what is going on? Like, am I going to be able to get back to work as a doctor, as anything? And I'm going to be doing Walmart, sitting at the chair, like, because at that point, I was just sleeping most of the day. Like, I had so bad
Mm-hmm.
symptoms. I couldn't even look at the computer screen because my eyes were hurting and I had headaches. I was just like laying down in the dark because the light sensitivity. And I remember one day, all of a sudden, I don't even know how it happened, but I just felt him say, "I've got you. Like, just trust me." And then, like, from that
Mm-hmm.
moment, I was like, "Hey, fine." He was like, "You're not to go back to work." That was clear. And this is what you want. I want you to do YouTube and start talking about spiritual things. And that's what I
Mm.
did. And so basically, I can definitely attest to what you're saying about how the love of God really wraps around you in a way that it just can't even be explained.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. I don't know. Did you know that story?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
I had no idea. I
Yeah,
literally had
I'm starting to
no
share it more, I guess, now that I'm like I don't feel emotional or anything when I talk about it. And my symptoms are in
idea.
remission, except for when
Mhm.
I fly. When I fly, I still feel the fatigue and my heart rate
Okay.
still goes back up. But otherwise, things are fine.
Oh, I did not
That's
know.
a whole nother story. That whole testimony deserves a whole nother video
Yeah,
for
because
another
I
day.
didn't know, so I haven't watched it or did. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you say that. I wanted to ask you, girl, we could talk for like another hour
Yes.
for sure. But there is a trend in the faith based community that I've noticed that
Mhm.
seems to think that therapy and Jesus don't go together. I've heard people
Yeah.
say things like, oh, if you're depressed or you're anxious, you just need to
Mhm.
trust God more. And I wanted
Mhm.
to get your thoughts. You could actually speak to the person who feels that way. What are your thoughts as a believer, as someone in the mental health space? What are your thoughts on that?
So I believe in God. I believe in God's omnipotence. I believe in God's power. And if you read the Bible and you embrace the Bible, you will see clear throughout scriptures the differences in how Christ healed. There were times when Jesus would heal in an instant. There were times Jesus would heal in the next hour, but there were also times when he took people on a journey. Okay. And I think what can happen, what you learn through a journey, God wants people to learn because, yes, He can heal you from addiction in this moment if you wanted to. I'm going to just be blunt and say that God can heal you from addiction. God can heal you from depression. God can do it if that's in His will to do that. But there's something in the journey that we can miss if that immediate healing takes place. There are lessons we need to learn. There's character to be built. There is forgiveness that needs to take place. So much has to happen that requires us on this journey. And I'll be honest, like 10 years ago, it was a friend of mine who, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. That was like my first experience with, severe loss. I had lost, my husband to be, just suddenly. And it was a friend of mine who said, "Hey, I think you should talk to someone." And so I went to
Mm,
pastoral counseling. And again, yes, God could have healed me, but in the way I was with God in that moment, God used a vehicle, a person to actually help me get to that place of understanding, which helped my relationship. So for those who think that, I agree, God can heal you, but I do believe there are other instances where He won't just heal you immediately. And that's why I told people God creates therapists. Okay. God created therapists. So,
Right.
okay. So
Just like he created doctors and
yeah,
medicines.
God gives everybody a calling and assignment, and he gives therapists because from the therapy you learn tools, you learn insights, you learn skills, you just learn a whole lot to help nurture your not just yourself but also your relationships. So, I would never seek to try to convince anybody of this. That's just my belief. I do believe therapy has its benefits, and for those of you who say Jesus can handle it all, yes, he can, but sometimes he chooses not to, and sometimes Jesus's version of handling it is through a therapist.
Oh, that's so
That's
good.
that's just my
That
best
is
way to
so good.
that's just my best way to
Sometimes
say it.
Jesus, I need to write that down. Sometimes
Sometimes
Jesus'
Jesus's
way of
way of
handling
handling it is through a therapist.
is doing therapist. Yeah, and me speaking on the physical side, I deal with health and things like that. Sometimes Jesus' way of that can go apply for other disease, other things too. Sometimes Jesus' way of handling your battle with either excess weight or heart problems is by encouraging you to go through a dietary program. I'm encouraging you to see a nutritionist, right? So you see a nutritionist to help you with your food. Then you can see a therapist to help you with some of your negative thought
Yeah.
patterns, the ruminating and things like that. That's really powerful. I really feel passionate about helping people to number one, I really wish we could just break the stigma of mental health, but then also I wish that people wouldn't struggle in silence so much because I'm very intuitive. I have like a strong discerning spirit. So I can tell when people are struggling emotionally. And I know there are a lot of people that are struggling emotionally and they're not talking about it to anyone. They're trying to pretend that everything is fine. They're trying to, keep this strong woman, strong man persona, and inside they're struggling.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to me. So what do you have for our audience, I guess, as a takeaway? Let's see. We talked about a lot of different things. We
A
talked about
lot.
women, identity. Y'all need to listen to this episode again. Bookmark it. Share it with your friend. We talked about
Yeah.
identity, your self-worth. We talked about resolving conflicts in friendships and in marriages. We talked about resiliency and stress and depending on God to help you through those challenging seasons. And we'll have the links for Dr. Reid's website so you can look at her program, her book. She has written several books as well. So thank you so much for joining
No,
us
it's
today,
my
Dr.
pleasure
Reid. This
for
was amazing.
inviting
And guys,
me.
we did not plan to coordinate. We both just happened to wear polka dots
Yes. Oh,
today.
yes.
Yes, blue. Yes, polka dots. I love polka dots.
Yes.
So what closing takeaways do you have for the people? What's your one thing you want them to remember from this episode?
Oh my gosh, that's tough. I think the one thing that you were talking about just now, when you're talking about breaking the stigma and the strong women and strong man schema, it takes more strength to do what you're doing now than to actually to seek help to some degree. Because what we're going through is taking out a lot out of the silence that we are in, is taking a lot out of us. And it's understandable, but we're really causing ourselves more pain, more damage, more harm by actually suffering in silence than it is for us to actually reach out for help. And so I would just encourage anyone who is just suffering in silence to know that you are like worth the healing, but also that a lot of the things that we are fearful of, we may find out may not even happen. We may find out that the people who we're afraid to seek help from could be so much more receptive and are out there waiting on us. And I know it's like a lot. You asked for like one takeaway, but it's just coming to me. But I think that a lot of time we may feel that because we're so strong and we present this scheme and this image that we can't reach out for help, and we should. But I think it can take a lot of strength to also do what we're doing, and what we're doing is not productive, and actually seeking help is what could actually set us on the path to healing and freedom. So I would just encourage anyone who is actually, struggling, with anything, that help is available to you. God wants us to end on this note. Jesus said that, I came so that you may have life, and so that you may have
Yes.
life abundantly.
I love
And
that,
and
abundantly.
that just not just means monetarily, it means in health, it means in wealth, it means in just your feeling and your emotional and your pursuit and your passion. So really, if you need healing to live that abundant life, then hey, you're worthy of pursuing that healing. So, but I would leave everyone with that verse that I believe is John 10, verse 10, that I came that you may have life and that you may have it more abundantly.
I love that. That was so good. I have thoroughly enjoyed this
Thank you.
episode. We
Me
definitely have to
too.
chat again. Thank you so much for sharing
No,
your
thank you so
insights, your
much.
knowledge and wisdom with my audience. I know they are going to truly love this episode. Like and subscribe, follow, check out Dr. Reid's link to our website below. And if you have any questions, comment below. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Reid. This was
You.
amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye.
Bye.